All right, and I am back. So this comes into the question: um, is private healthcare or public healthcare better? And if you talk to someone who leans further right, they will probably tell you quite fervently that private healthcare is actually better because you can get better quality service, which they're right. If you talk to someone on the left, they may tell you that it is only fair if it's accessible to everyone. And that is a very Canadian sentiment. So I would recommend that you go in and read this 267 and 268 and just try and come out with whatever your opinion is on it. Do you think that the way that we as Canadians run it as publicly funded healthcare is better, or do you think the way that the Americans run it as privately funded healthcare is better? And that is an actual topic of conversation that comes up every so often. By the time you guys are graduating high school, we'll probably be looking at the argument in the future, as we've had in the past, about whether or not we should do a two-tiered healthcare system, more in line with what the Americans have. So I'm going to bust over a few pages that we aren't going to really look at right now to come down here. So this is just basically what are taxes. Taxes are things where the government takes money, whether it be income tax or GST, off of everything you buy. So right now our GST is 5%. So everything you purchase, the government takes 5% on top of that. So we pay an extra 5%, and that goes to pay for the various social programs that we enjoy as Canadians. With this whole COVID-19 thing, there's a lot of discussion right now about whether or not Alberta should increase the amount of taxes that it takes to meet some of the financial needs of the province, as it's kind of really running through its money and borrowing money quite rapidly. So not that I'm condoning it or endorsing it, but I could see a point at which Canada, or Alberta, goes into a time where it has a provincial sales tax on top of a general sales tax, the federal sales tax. So this word median income that's going to be coming up in a little bit just means the middle income for the average Canadian. So if your family made $67,000, which is the middle of the range, then your family would pay $11,000 in taxes. I know for me, I paid somewhere in the range of $15,000 in taxes last year, or something along those lines. So it does affect your bottom line. Again, I don't want to tip my hat one way or the other, but there is, having seen someone be rolled out of a hospital, it's hard to, it's very hard to go and decide the other way. So these graphs, what page is 282? These are great. You should look at these. These are very interesting. So when you look at this, you look at the big pieces. So 32%, that's the end of the school day. 32% of the government's spending went to social services, so affordable housing and pensions for senior citizens, and money is transferred to the provinces through Canada Social Transfer. So that includes things like the education, those kinds of things. So 12% is protection of persons. So that's the Canadian military and our police service. There's 60% that goes to other. 15% of the money that Canada spends is going to pay back loans that is taken to do things. This education fund here, this is just universities and colleges. This is not provincial education. And 10% is going to the healthcare system. So there's a lot of money if you count these up, social services, protection, those kinds of things. There's a lot of money going to a few smaller pieces, but this really is a very important piece. Then we get to the provinces, and the provinces graphs will all probably look fairly similar to this. So if you look education, so K-12 education takes up 25% of the money that the province of Alberta puts out, and healthcare is another 33%. So between these two, you have more than 50% of the money that Alberta puts out being put out to pay for healthcare and pay for education. Add on the social services, child protection, income assistance, so that's welfare, those kinds of things, affordable housing. And we're again, even further, we're not quite at 75%, but we're pushing that boundary. So there's a big chunk of money here at any rate that is money that the government has to put out. And if you look at the current political climate, we have things where the government is talking about cutting spending in certain areas or changing the way that spending is kind of allocated. So the doctors have had to change the way that they're able to do billing and those kinds of things. And so that is to try and control the amount of money that is put into healthcare and education. These two are the big ones for the province to think about, because again, that's more than 50%. So when you make money, so you make money and you pay some of your money to the government in taxes, and the government puts the money out to all the different programs that are being funded by our government. If you take in money or someone else takes in money that they are not paying taxes on, we are talking about something called tax evasion. And this is, evasion means to avoid. So we're talking about people that are trying to avoid putting money, as much money as they can, into the government's piggy banks to be able to pay for these various social programs. And so that is, we were talking, I mentioned it earlier in the last video, is a black market type of a situation or underground economy. Now, an example of this, we set up a fire pit in our backyard and we needed some firewood. And so we checked on Facebook and a guy said that he was selling firewood. And I don't know for sure, but we gave him the $170 or whatever it was for a cord of wood. And I don't know if he's paying any taxes on that money that we gave to him. It's very possible that he's just taken all $170 for himself, and there will be no money put in to help with the overall system that Canada runs. So that's what that underground economy means, because it's not seen by the government. And so, yeah. This cartoon is basically the same idea. And another different ways of looking at things. So this is the essential question that I wanted to get to with this video, was what values have actually shaped our decision to make our political system and our taxation system the way it is. Because there is some rationale that says we as Canadians are going to have an economic system that runs this way as compared with our American neighbors. So these are actually way back in the day, Stéphane Dion. He was a very short time for running the Liberal Party of Canada. Gilles Duceppe, he followed up after Jean Chrétien, and Jean Chrétien got eliminated for a lot of people being very mad about the way that he spent money, government money. Stephen Harper, he was the leader of the Conservative Party, of course, for a long time. Elizabeth May, she's the leader of the Green Party, and Jack Layton is the former leader. Nowadays, it's Singh that is the leader of the NDP. He was very wildly popular with a lot of the population of Canada. So each of these people represent some position inside of that political spectrum, and the Bloc Québécois can shift further left or right on issues. But even someone like Elizabeth May recently has said that she thinks that Canada should only refine or take in Canadian oil, that we should stop taking in oil from outside of Canada, which is, again, it's a shift in the way that she is, her party. So it's not just, these parties are not automatically locked in very far left or very far right, but they do fluctuate somewhat depending upon the general political climate in Canada and the desires of certain members and those kinds of things. So Political platform. We talked about this when the election was happening. So we talked about the various platforms for the different parties. I'm not going to spend a ton of time on this, but each of these parties may have certain things that are universal across all of them. Healthcare is there, healthcare is there, healthcare is there, healthcare is there. So all of them have some issue on healthcare, with the exception of the Bloc Québécois, because the Bloc Québécois is only interested in what benefits Quebec. These guys are all looking at the whole of Canada. So when you look at them, their political platform, like you guys found out when we were doing the last election, kind of fits their ideologies, the things that they think are important. So a conservative ideology will have certain things about taxation, will have certain things about how money is spent, will have certain things about whether or not we take loans to pay for things. As compared with like an NDP at the opposite end of the spectrum on most issues, they will have a different point of view on taxation, on equality, and on what's good for the overall running of Canada. So when you look at different parties, what you need to see is the things that are going on in the back of a person's. You might want to think about like their heart, the heart issues, or the even if it's not a heart issue, if it's an economic policy, then you're looking at, how much do I trust government? How much do I think government is looking out for the best interest of everyone? So there's various different ways that each of these policies fits for each party. Now they have these in kind of a left to right economic spectrum. I know that Party A here is further left than Party C, and I can look at the various things on here. This Party C is much more closely aligned with like an American view of how things should work, whereas Party B and Party A, this one is further left than Canada is, maybe closer to what China is, and this one here is much more closely in line with what the way Canada kind of runs things, being a centrist. So we've talked about this quite extensively this year. I'm going to bust through this because I feel like we did a good job earlier on. Now, in the States, this is where I want to get, this is one thing I want to get to. The US runs a two-party system. So you're either a Democrat or you're a Republican. And there are independents that run in the States. But generally speaking, if you're voting for someone that's actually going to get elected, you're voting for either Republican or Democrat. Now, they both have policies on healthcare. They have very different policies on healthcare. And so generally speaking, when you're looking at Republicans, I always think of these guys, the way I remember Republicans as being more right-leaning is I think R is the Christian right. And that way I can remember this. Their economic policies will be further right than Canada's would be. They're going to say things more in line with what Donald Trump would say today, where he's saying that the government should get its hands out of people's pockets and let people make decisions that fit their desires or their needs or their wants. And the Democratic Party, right now, as I'm filming this, doesn't have a leader, although it looks kind of like Joe Biden is the likely one to win that leadership, unless, of course, a major scandal derails his attempt to become the leader of the Democratic Party. But they have a kind of an opposite point of view as compared with the Republicans, and so they're playing off each other, and they're trying to pull people one way or the other so that they can have enough votes in each state or in each riding to be able to win enough seats to win the presidency of the United States. Again, I'm not here to go and say one is more right than the other. Some things that economic policy for the Democrats, some of you guys might have a hard time swallowing because it's too far left for your values. Where lots of people have, lots of Christians are aligned with the Republican Party because they look and say, oh, these guys have policies that I see as being part of, my religious worldview or my theology. So there's very different I mean, they're all talking about the same issues for the most part. They're just taking the opposite view on them when you look at the actual policies that are being put forward by them. And actually going back to this very much fits. The reason why the U.S. is further right than us goes all the way back to like the Boston Tea Party and the American Revolution, trying to get out from underneath the thumb of a heavy tax burden from Britain. So this all makes a lot of sense why America be further right than Canada does, because their identity is born out of the fight for freedom from what they saw as a tyrannical tax system from Britain. And so the reason why they're so far right is because of that. So that's why the farther right end is lower taxes, where these guys would say we can increase taxes a certain amount. And even if they increase the taxes, it would still be less than what Canada would pay. Tommy Douglas, as a person, was the leader of the Progressive Conservative Party, the NDP party back in the day. And he was the one for Saskatchewan that started universal health care. So we have universal health care as a Canadian because of Tommy Douglas's work. And for the most part, I would tend to say that if we were to do a poll, I would say that the majority of Canadians, actually, I can say this pretty definitively. They did the Greatest Canadian TV show. It's right here. And he won over top of, John A. MacDonald, Terry Fox, Wayne Gretzky, because for the most part, Canadians look at our healthcare system and say, this is something that is amazing. So he played a pivotal role in that. And so he ends up I know that some of you guys are going to talk about this with your parents. Your parents are going to say that we should move further right and get out of this fully funded public health care. But I would tend to say that based off of the voting in the Greatest Canadian TV show and those kinds of things, that the majority of Canadians actually value that left-leaning ideology, which is fully publicly funded healthcare, as compared with people that would say that American-style private healthcare is better. So I'm going to scroll down here. I don't think there is much else people talking about being part of a political party. And that is it for Chapter 8. I'm going to put up a couple of videos, a YouTube video for a program that I think is very biased, but worthwhile looking at and thinking about how much you agree or disagree with it, and what things you think are objectively true and what things you think are blown out of proportion, and what the ideal world would look like for you. So I'm going to put a video up. It will take up the majority of the rest of your week, and then some of the following week as well. So I'll see you guys later. I hope these were informative and helpful.